Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Jakejames Lugo and welcome to the channel. So let's continue our adventures with the pink puffball of Nintendo himself, Kirby, in his next outing on the Game Boy, Kirby's Dream Land 2. A lot of people, myself included, consider this to be a classic, so let's actually find out if it still holds up even after all these years. And to be honest, I have a lot to say about this game, some good, some bad, but all of it is interesting nonetheless. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is the sequel to the Pink Puffball's first Game Boy adventure that released in 1995. Believe it or not, it's actually the third Kirby game to come out in that era, since Kirby's Adventure was released a few years prior for the NES. This is important because that was the game that introduced Kirby's copy ability, not Dream Land 2 on the Game Boy. This is a common mistake because people went from playing the first Dream Land and went directly into this game, skipping over Kirby's Adventure. That game would later get remade as Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland for the Game Boy Advance, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, the story with Dream Land 2 is simple like the previous games, but starts to introduce some of the darker elements of the Kirby series in a very subtle fashion. An evil force named Dark Matter appears and starts stealing the rainbow bridges that connect the 7 Rainbow Islands together. While doing this, Dark Matter possesses King Dedede and begins a conquest to take over Dreamland and turn it into a dark world. To stop this, Kirby teams up with 3 animal friends he meets in Dreamland. This includes Rick the Hamster, Coo the Owl, and Kine the Ocean Sunfish. The 4 of them set off into the different Rainbow Islands to fight the various monsters that appear and stop Dark Matter from taking over Dreamland. The tension in this story is definitely bolder than the previous game, but the overall tone is still lighthearted. Kirby is just as cuddly looking as he's always been, and his new animal friends follow suit. But as a sequel to the first Dreamland, the game definitely adds a lot of good things that build upon the original. Now if I'm being honest, this story is a little bit more darker than the previous 2 Kirby games. Not by a lot, since there isn't a whole lot of dark elements all over the place, but you start to see this stuff and you start to get the dichotomy of what we'll notice throughout the entire Kirby series, that lighthearted nature with some of the dark undertones underneath. The other thing too I find is very interesting about Dreamland 2 is that it makes Dreamland as like a place and as a world for Kirby and his friends seem a lot more bigger than it did in the previous games, which I like. I think that's something that all sequels should do in some respect, especially if there's like a specific world or universe or anywhere that we're going to be like, involved with some stuff with. Things should get bigger, things should get better, things should feel a little bit much more grandioso than the previous outings. And funny enough, you could say the exact same thing about Kirby's Dream Land 2 with its gameplay, so speaking of which, let's just dive right into it and talk about the gameplay of Dream Land 2 and why exactly it's better than the previous games, with a couple asterisks here and there. The first thing you'll notice about Dream Land 2 is how similar it is to the first game, while also making a good effort to add new things that make it feel different. Kirby could still jump around, suck in enemies, and fly like he did before, but now he has the ability to copy the powers of his enemies. Visually, this doesn't change Kirby at all, but it does open up the gameplay to new types of challenges to overcome. Unfortunately, you can't copy the abilities of every baddie, but you'll immediately recognize the ones that you can. These powers can range from shooting blades, blowing a freeze breath, turning into a fireball, and even using an umbrella that can also slow down your falls. It's really silly, but makes sense within the world and can be very helpful throughout the game. The other part of this is Kirby's allies, which both help and hinder Kirby at various times. You could find Rick, Coo, or Kine captured in certain rooms and rescue them from the mini-bosses that you fight. When you do so, Kirby will ride them around and progress through the rest of the level with an extra health bar and modified copy abilities, depending on who you're teamed up with. This is great and can provide a good boost through a level, but there are a few moments where using the allies can become a problem. I had a few times in my playthrough where I couldn't advance past a certain obstacle or got blocked by a wall because of this. I tried to move around but would keep hitting a barrier that prevented me from entering certain spaces. This is easily solved by dismissing your ally and continuing onward with Kirby alone, but why should I have to sacrifice an ally I've held onto just to get to a simple door? It's areas like this that artificially increase the difficulty by forcing you into situations like this. Which brings me to the biggest change of this game, the overall challenge. Kirby's Dream Land 2 has a big difficulty spike towards the later half of the game. The first 5 areas have an easygoing pace, but then you'll get to the last 2 areas and immediately feel how harsh the difficulty spikes upward. The platforming challenges get borderline cheap if you aren't already aware of them beforehand. Some of them even require you to know that you need specific copy abilities to get around them and grab any power-ups and health boost. Now this wouldn't be so bad if things were spread out throughout all the areas of the game, but it does feel like everything was thrown in at the last minute towards the end. This doesn't make the game impossible by any stretch, nor does it make it bad by any stretch either, but it definitely shows how Dreamland 2 still needed some adjustments with its overall pacing. Now, if I'm being honest, the challenge in this game doesn't really bother me all that much. I do understand why some people might be a little bit annoyed with like the sudden change towards the end of the game, but even though overall this game is still pretty easy in comparison to many other platformers out there, I still feel like and I wish that everything was a little bit more spread out evenly across the entire experience. Another thing that I do want to mention that I feel like is something that doesn't really get talked a lot about with Dreamland 2 is that the game doesn't give you a whole lot of information within the game itself. Maybe there's some like extra stuff inside like the instruction manual or like supplemental material, but like certain elements, like especially the abilities with some of Kirby's allies, all the different like, animals you could team up with, they actually have some unique abilities that you don't get to see in practice a whole lot, but there's stuff that's there that are very situational. For example, like having Rick, he's actually runs a little bit faster than Kirby does standardly alone, or any of the other characters, and he doesn't slip on ice. I didn't really experience this unless I was like really looking for it in certain instances. I mean, there's other things too with Kine as well as Ku that have their own little abilities, but still, I wish that the game actually showed you that, or at least told you that, kind of like what they did in later games of the series. And funny enough, how I mentioned this when it comes to actually giving the player information within the game itself. Let's talk about the extra content, or specifically this alternate ending and the bonus stuff that you could get after you complete Dreamland 2, and why exactly I feel like things could have been handled a little bit better. Now let me be frank here. I like that there's multiple endings and you have an extra boss fight towards the end of the game, but my only problem is that you have to have known to collect the rainbow drops during the playthrough beforehand. Some people might disagree with me, but I feel that the way this is handled in-game is not that great. As many times as I've played Kirby's Dream Land 2 over the years, I never knew about these until I read about it while making this review. The game itself doesn't really give you any hints or info about the rainbow drops unless you run into them on accident. In my case, I found some of them by accident and just continued onward. When you defeat King DDD without getting all of the rainbow drops, you receive a standard ending that hints at more stuff to come. Many consider this to be the bad ending. However, if you collect all of the rainbow drops before beating King DDD at the final stage, you get an entirely new boss fight against Dark Matter. I won't lie, after beating the game the first time, I looked up how this fight plays out and the ending that you get from it. While it's cool to see the epilogue after defeating Dark Matter, I really don't feel the reward matches up to the effort that you need to put in. I could compare this to what was done with Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You could finish that game straight through and get a bad ending that wraps everything up. But if you take the time to collect a few specific items, you get more way beyond that ending and open up a whole new section of the game. That is significantly more than just an extra boss fight. In Kirby's Dream Land 2, you need to find the rainbow drops in specific areas and know to have certain copy abilities on hand in order to get them. This could be frustrating without any sort of help from a guide to do it. It's not impossible, but the effort going into this for the final ending I don't feel matches up well for the reward. Okay, I totally get it that many of you out there are going to disagree with me on almost all these points, but understand where I'm coming at it from. To me, there are so many other games, even ones made by Nintendo, that have handled this thing far better and had much more interesting experiences, especially post-game if you've gone through the game at least one time. Another thing to note is that this type of thing would actually become a staple for future Kirby games. You actually see this in like Kirby Planet Robobot, you see this in Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, which is a remake of the previous game. Like, there's just so many other things about this that have come evolved and and changed up over the years, and I think it's actually kind of cool. That doesn't take away from how much of a classic Dreamland 2 is. It just, again, specifically for me as a player, I just didn't feel like the reward and like the turnout and the stuff that you get afterwards was really worth the effort and the time to invest in getting all these different things. I felt like maybe later Kirby games in the series actually did this better, where they give you more areas to explore, and I feel like you get even better epilogues like after the main story. It's just stuff that I feel like, again, over time evolved for the better. So after everything I've said, can I recommend that you guys check out Kirby's Dream Land 2 on the Game Boy? Yeah, this game is still great even after all these years. I'd still think it's fantastic. Granted, I've criticized a lot about it, but I still think it's a fun and interesting game, especially for a portable game that you could bring with you on the go. There's some interesting elements to it. It builds upon the foundation of the previous Kirby games, including the one on NES that many people probably skipped out on. It still is a fun and cuddly and interesting game that's colorful. Granted, it's on the Game Boy, but still offers a fun and interesting world to engage with, and builds upon another icon for the Nintendo Pantheon that people were really starting to grow fond of back in the day. If you haven't played any of the earlier Kirby games, or you haven't really dived into this one, I highly suggest that you do so, especially if you're a fan of the later ones in the series that were on Game Boy Advance or on the 3DS or the DS, because a lot of the stuff that you see in those games are really established in Dreamland 2. Even though stuff like the copy abilities started in the NES game, but like it was really kind of perfected or at least iterated on in this one here. And I feel like you'll really appreciate a lot of what we got later on with Kirby if you come back to this one. And there you go, everyone. That's my thoughts and my overall review of Kirby's Dream Land 2 on the Game Boy. It's just a fun game. It's wholesome. It's interesting for people that just love good platformers or just good Nintendo games overall. I mean, it could be completed in a short period of time, but it's a little longer than the first Dream Land, and even by the time you're done with it, even after a short or long trip, you'll be satisfied with it. It's just a fun and interesting game with a cute character. Again, it's our favorite little Nintendo puffball. But as always, with any game that I review on this channel, that's just my opinion about it. Let me know what you guys think about Kirby's Dream Land 2 down below in the comments section. Tell me, are you a fan of Dream Land 2? Is it your favorite in the series? What are some of the other really good Kirby games that you probably played, or any other games that are similar to Kirby? Not necessarily done by Nintendo, but just in general, if they got similar elements to them. Tell us about that stuff down below in the comments. Hey there everyone, thanks for watching this video. I appreciate all of your support as always. On the side here I have some game reviews and other cool videos you might like to watch. Make sure you leave me a comment down below and subscribe to the channel too. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to be in the know when I post up new videos for you to check out. I'll talk to you all again real soon. Peace out and stay epic everybody.